Paul Samuelson, the godfather of modern economics, described Paul Krugman as, quote, the rising star of this century and the next, and the world beats a path to his door. A professor of economics at MIT, Krugman has recently unleashed a bitter attack on the Clinton administration. In his new book, Peddling Prosperity, he says that President Clinton, whom he once endorsed, has a deeply misguided view of America's economic problems. And so he's here to tell us why. Welcome. I mean, you don't just write for this. I mean, you write. I mean, it may have been excerpted, but there was also the piece in Foreign Affairs.
That's right.
And the Economist called you the most celebrated economist of your generation, and the American Economist gave you an award several years ago for the best American economist under the age of 40. Are you still under the age of 40?
No, I'm not. I've crossed that threshold.
All right, so that's all right. Now, here's the question: what's wrong? Here's what I understand, and then tell me, in the interest of time, what I've got wrong. Too much emphasis in this country in believing our problems have to do with trade, number one. Number two, too much emphasis on how we can restore our competitive position by how we change our relationship with other countries in the balance of trade. Number three, the right place to look is how our productivity and how we use technology, and if we understand that, we can maintain an economic growth that will make us competitive with everybody. What did grade me? C.
No, I think B+.
Okay.
The use of the word competitive there in the last sentence gets you into some trouble.
Okay, I know.
You know, the global
that was stupid on my part to use that, see, because that's the word you don't like.
That's the lure of it, right?
Okay.
Everybody wants to think about world trade. Everyone wants to think about the economy as a struggle. It's us against them.
Right.
There's a prize out there, and if it's one of the other of us is going to get it, it's us or the Japanese, or it's us or the Europeans, and somebody's going to win that struggle.
Right.
That's a metaphor which, if you know much economics, you know it's just wrong. That's just not the way the world works. And the sad thing is that that seductive but basically silly view about the way the world works is something that President Clinton, who believes himself to be sophisticated about economics, has fallen into.
Yeah, and Laura Tyson gets high marks by some as his chairman of his Council of Economic Advisors, a job that once you were on the great mentioners list. Yes?
Yeah.
So far? Yes?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm temperamentally unsuited.
Okay, but I mean, you weren't unhappy you didn't get the job then?
No,
you
I was actually greatly relieved.
As they might say, PO'd?
That people are going to say that, but in fact, I was greatly relieved. And I think advice to any future administration, it's clear that I get PO'd too quickly about other things to be given that job.
Don't mess with Krugman. He'll write a book.
That's right.
All right, Clinton, you think, bought into the idea of what?
He bought into the idea of world trade as this struggle. I mean, the moment when I really knew what this book was about was the moment when the president-elect proudly displayed his copy of a book by Lester Thoreau called Head to Head,
right,
which has the subtitle, The Coming Battle Among Japan, Europe, and America, and which then says on the jacket, the greatest war of the century has just begun and America has already decided to lose. And I said to myself, you know, this is a man, the leader of the U.S., very bright man, who thinks he understands the way the world works, thinks he understands economics, and he's fallen for this kind of irresponsible view of world trade as a
What's
struggle.
irresponsible about it, then, before we get to what's wrong with the economy?
Well, the first thing is,
what's irresponsible about that analysis?
The first thing is, if it's wrong, then it's, you know, to go with a wrong idea that's appealing has got to be a bad thing. Even if you can't point directly to a specific policy that goes wrong, you're going to be led into there's kind of this thing we talk about in economics, Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good. Bad ideas drive out good. If you're going to insist, as a kind of token of loyalty to your administration, that people adhere to an ideology which is just flatly false, just wrong on the facts, then it's going to cheapen, it's going to debase the quality of economic thought all around. An analogy I sometimes use is to say that, look, if you had an administration that was committed to creationism, that's going to hurt its science policy, even in areas that have got nothing directly to do with the theory of evolution. But more specifically, in that moment, actually a little bit before, just listening to the rhetoric at the famous economic summit in Little Rock.
Yeah, the one that was held during the transition.
I saw, right in that moment, you saw the germ of what is a near trade war between us and, verge of a trade war between us and Japan.
Right, here's what you got to help me understand. You got to tell me not that it's all wrong, but what's wrong with it. What's wrong with saying that trade is important? And that if a lot of American money are chasing Japanese goods, it is because those Japanese goods are better.
I like to put it this way. think about what's the metaphor here, right? The metaphor is that we are competing with Japan, or we're competing with the European Union the way that Coke and Pepsi are competing for markets. Okay, so the question is, why is the U.S. and Europe, or the U.S. and Japan, not like Coke and Pepsi? First thing is, trade is not that big a factor in the U.S. economy.
Right.
Trade is about 10% of our economy. 90% of what we produce is for our own use. You've got to keep that in perspective. That means that if you can improve our productivity in services, I mean, if we could increase our productivity 10% in the fast food industry, that would do more for our standard of living than increasing our productivity 10% in computers, because we've got more people working in fast food than computers by a long shot. The second reason it's wrong is that countries, unlike corporations, are not only selling goods that compete with each other, they're also each other's main markets, external markets. They're also each other's suppliers of useful things. If Japan produces a better product, well, that may drive down the prices of things that the U.S. sells in the world market, but it also drives down the prices of things that we buy in the world market, and a richer Japan is a better market for our products. It can hurt us. In fact, in principle, foreign growth and improvement in foreign quality can hurt us. It can also help us. It depends on the details. But the best bet is, on the whole, a richer world is better for us.
All right, tell me what's wrong with this notion. It is that the American automobile companies finally woke up to the fact that they were losing market share. And they started making better cars, and they're beginning to grow in terms of market share again. And that says, what does that say? That they decided to make their products, I hate to use the word, but I don't know of a better word, more competitive with other companies' products.
Oh, look, when you get down, a country is
Therefore,
not...
they stop losing money, and they stop losing jobs in some cases.
Well, that in some ways is the least of the story.
Okay.
What is true is, it's okay to talk about firms competing. It's just when you get up to the level of countries that it starts to be a bad metaphor. A country is a lot more than the sum of its parts. Any kind of competition that makes firms get on their toes is a good thing. My home state of Massachusetts, we have a lot of computer companies that were riding pretty high and getting pretty fat and inefficient in the mid-1980s. They had been savaged by competition since then, not from Japan, but from California, because Silicon Valley is doing a better job of building computers that people want right now than Route 128 is. That's a good thing. We want that to happen. But international trade is nothing special. That's true of any kind of
Too much emphasis on international trade, and changes in international trade won't have that much of an impact on the economy, is your point.
Yeah, we're taking this 10% of our economy and treating it as if it's the whole dog. This little tail is wagging the whole dog. And we're turning it into an adversarial thing when, in fact, it's primarily a web of mutual benefits between countries.
Okay, tell me if the president calls you up tomorrow, unlikely to happen.
Right.
And he says, come on in for lunch, after I finish dealing, well, tomorrow he's going to be at the funeral, but let's just say he invites you in the first of next week and says, I got a lot of problems, including what am I going to do in foreign policy? I'm taking a lot of criticism there. But I also want to ask you, what should I do about the American economy? What should I emphasize? What ought to be my message?
The problem that economists have is, if they're serious,
they don't
the
know.
message is usually pretty boring. The message is a bunch of motherhood issues that everyone adheres to in principle and nobody wants to deal with in practice. So it's a list of things like basic education. We need to do something about basic education. It's clearly not doing the job. We have a partial checklist of things we should do. Some of them take money, some of them don't.
And we need to retrain workers, that kind of thing?
I'm not especially... I'm willing to try some pilot schemes on retraining workers. I think that this belief that massive national retraining schemes are the answer to our problems is a pretty heavy dose of wishful thinking.
Right. Certainly, education is one. What else?
Okay, we need higher national saving. The most definite thing you can do for higher national saving is to stop siphoning off a good part of the saving into a federal budget deficit. So we need to move as quickly as possible towards a balanced budget.
Mr. President, I say to you, Professor Krugman, I agree with you. I'm trying to emphasize education, and secondly, I'm trying to reduce the deficit. So far, I'm doing what you tell me to do.
Okay,
Go ahead.
but well, of course he's going to say that, right? And to some extent it's true, but there's been a lot of diversion of energy. I mean, if you were to ask what was at the top of the agenda for the last couple of months, it would probably have been, aside from health care, which is a thing we probably want to talk about a bit, would have been bashing the Japanese. That was a top priority item for the administration when, on any sort of rational calculus about how important it really is, it rates up there with better pricing for the use of federal lands by miners and loggers. It's about that important an issue, really, in terms of its impact on our standard of living.
But that just follows the fact you don't believe that trade is all that important.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, all right. Now, you got to say, well, look, I think you have to try charging up that hill again. What do we need? We almost certainly need some kind of an energy tax, for example. That was abandoned very quickly. Then there's a list of, there's a list of economistic things, like shifting over to making more use of prices and auctioned licenses to deal with pollution, trying to get the price system into dealing with traffic congestion, which is a very big economic issue. And then there's reforming healthcare.
Okay, tell me about healthcare before we go.
Okay, healthcare.
He says, look, give me a good idea, because that's all I've said is if you don't want to buy my plan, come up with a better idea.
Well, I think there are a couple of reasonable approaches to healthcare. We're not going to have time to do the whole thing. And I think there are two.
We hardly have time except for the headline, but go ahead.
But let's say that I regard healthcare as one of the great indirect disasters of this obsession with competitiveness. Because there's one guy, if you've been on these competitiveness circuits, these debates for years, there's one guy that we all know who's famous for having very strong opinions.
Ira Magaziner.
Ira Magaziner. The idea of putting Ira Magaziner in charge of 14% of gross national product, we wasted a year. In fact, he produced a plan which is simply infeasible politically and financially, and it's collapsing under its own weight. So the first thing to do is to go back and get some of the real healthcare experts and try to do a new plan fast.
All right. Paul Krugman's book is Peddling Prosperity. He is an economist that's gotten a lot of attention. I hope you'll come back. Economic Sense and Nonsense in the Age of Diminished Expectations. Thank you. Great to see you. We'll be right back. Stay with us.